You see, when we say, why am I still facing this and how can I get over it? The problem with such solution-focused, demanding answers is that our focus is often on ourselves and on the problem rather than God. We're looking to God simply as an answer man or someone that's going to provide a solution rather than an intimate, trusting relationship. And so the negative consequences of the problem is what's often focused on, and thus causes us anger. Welcome to Life as God Intended. I hope that today's broadcast is something that speaks to you, and if it does, we appreciate you subscribing to the channel and sharing it with your friends.
So in today's broadcast, we're going to be considering a question that was posed by a listener, and here's what they said. They asked this: I've experienced some major rejections in my life, and I'm struggling not knowing how to let go. I still have a lot of hurt and pain that I can't seem to get over. My question is, how may I more effectively process it? So that's kind of kicking off the content for today. Don, what would you have to say in response to our listener?
Well, I'm glad you tuned in. This certainly is a relevant question due to the fact that everybody, myself included, has experienced loss and rejection of some kind. That's common to mankind. And so first, may I say, in responding to a question like this, that as valuable as these broadcasts are, they are not a substitute for one-on-one personal counseling. And oftentimes, the inquiries that we have may justify, seeing somebody professionally and helping them to work through, helping them help you work through from a biblical Christian vantage point. So I did want to kind of say that as a little bit of a disclaimer. That being said, we can glean a lot by these interactions. And obviously, it's my prayer that you take what we talk about and share, and that you process it with the Lord, and you allow the Lord to make application in your life, because ultimately, He is the wonderful counselor. And so, as we're learning to participate with Christ, it is He who sets us free. So, with that kind of as a backdrop, once again, I'm acknowledging we live in a world filled with turmoil, probably more so than ever during the current experience that we've had, at least over the last 2 years, with this whole world pandemic. And so everybody has kind of had a heightened sense of rejection, not limited to that, obviously. And so with rejective experiences come all kinds of sorts of emotional, negative emotions. We all struggle emotionally with stuff like that because we don't know how to handle it. We don't know what to do. And so often a person finds themselves questioning at these times of uncertainty as to, why and how can this happen and what am I supposed to do? And again, I'm not chiding us. We all go through those moments, and wondering if we should maybe have done something differently. If so, would it have turned out differently? We have those kinds of questions. Maybe times our minds are filled with doubts, and we also might find ourselves questioning or even kind of doubting God in His goodness during times of loss and anger. And so we've got to work through that loss and anger. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who came for one of their first session, and they admittedly said, I'm really struggling with God. I'm angry with God because of the things that I'm facing in my life, and I don't know how to work through it. And so maybe you're angry, and maybe you're angry because of the vulnerability that you gave somebody else in your life. And as a result, you gave somebody else the ability to hurt you. And now you're struggling with some regret. And when people hurt us, we often feel lonely. And sometimes we don't want to share what happened. Sometimes it's too personal. And so then we try to keep it to ourselves, and it makes it even worse. So, and then we might feel like nobody cares and nobody understands, even though we didn't share it with anybody to find out if anybody did care or understand.
Catch-22.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22, exactly. So we may experience, as I said, this regret or this remorse for decisions that we've made or circumstances that we found ourselves in. And these feelings, again, I'm acknowledging, affect us all. So I guess the real question is, how should a Christian process hurt and pain? And my bottom answer would be through trusting deep relationship with Christ.
And Don, I think it's important that you bring up the topic of trust. Because I think it's definitely better advice than doubt and regret. But what are some of the implications of a deep, trusting relationship with God? And maybe what encouragement would you have for our listeners?
Yes, for sure, trusting is better than the circle reasoning of doubt and regret and questioning ourselves. And, when it comes to dealing with hurt and pain that we've encountered through the journey of life that we're all engaged in at this moment, there's often an endless supply of advice by well-meaning Christians that they offer. And it kind of reminds us of the proverbial Job's comforters. Everybody's got some advice for you when you're in the middle of something. And not all that advice is, it might be given, with sincere intent, but not all of it is actually very wise advice. And so when we or those that we love are hurting, we all want answers, don't we? And we kind of want them now, like pounding our fists, give me an answer and give it to me now. And sometimes I think we even approach God that way, because God knows, and therefore, here I am submitting myself to you, and so, I need an answer. And the other thing about this is if there are delays in getting answers or finding solutions, well, what happens? Well, we often find ourselves asking God or others why. Okay, didn't I check the box right? What am I supposed to do here? Why did this happen to me? Or we may find ourselves asking, what? What have I done wrong? Or what haven't I done properly? Or what am I to do to fix this? For myself or someone that I love that's hurting. And again, the bottom line is we want to find ourselves finding answers. We want to kind of find ourselves demanding of God or others, this is the problem, and this needs to be addressed, and this needs to be addressed like ASAP or like yesterday. And so the problem with these why or what questions is, why am I still focusing on myself? You see, when we say, why am I still facing this, and how can I get over it? The problem with such solution-focused, demanding answers is that our focus is often on ourselves and on the problem rather than God. We're looking to God simply as an answer man or someone that's going to provide a solution rather than an intimate, trusting relationship. And so the negative consequences of the problem is what's often focused on, and thus causes us anger, which is often followed by regret because, okay, I shouldn't have got angry. Well, I did. So, now it's like even worse. So it's truly unfortunate that many Christians view God as the answer. You say, wait a minute, Don, I thought he was the answer. And many Christians view the Bible as the answer book. Doesn't the Bible have all the answers for all of life's problems? And when you focus on God or the Scriptures that way, guess what you're lacking? You're lacking trust in God Himself. And you're simply looking for a solution.
I think it's so pivotal that you bring that up, because I think really what we're talking about here is that God is not only interested in just fixing our problems and making sure we're comfortable. Mm-hmm. And even though that's hard for us to hear sometimes, that's the truth. So then I guess the question for us to ask is there any redeeming value in experiencing some of the suffering that we face? And is there purpose in pain and suffering, and how God can kind of use that?
Yes, yes would be my answer, and that's exactly what I am suggesting. I'm suggesting that God isn't simply interested in fixing what's broke. That seems like it's uncaring and that God doesn't care. Of course he does, and it's not uncaring. We might say it this way: pain and brokenness has purpose. Pain and brokenness has purpose. As already stated, we all experience pain and suffering at some time in our lives. While our natural reaction to pain is to overcome it, to get rid of it, or to numb it, we need to realize that God allows pain for a reason, for a purpose. In fact, our suffering is a sign of God's love and grace. Now, please don't turn off the tape. Hear me out here. I want you to listen to what James says in chapter 1 of his epistle. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds," which would include the one that you and I are facing, "because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." He goes on to say, "Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." So obviously, as we learn to rely on God's grace through these difficult times of suffering and pain in life, we begin to discover that we are not hopeless pawns in some evil person's hand, but rather we are participants with God as he is working his grace activity in and through us. And so what we need to understand here is it's as though there's a bigger picture to the ups and the downs of life that we experience. And hopefully, we're beginning to experience the intimacy with God working for his intended good in our lives. Reminds me a lot of Romans 8:28, doesn't it? And so, may I say that, and this may come as a shock, that pain is an opportunity, not for God to see how strong you are, but for you to see how strong he is. For you to learn and to derive from him in your time of need. And he's inviting you and I to enter into deep relationship through trusting Christ. That's with everything in our Christian lives. We must begin with God. It's easy to get distracted when we're suffering and in pain and get focused on whatever's causing that. But we need to focus on God. God is good, and because he is love, he is trustworthy. And apart from this absolute truth, we have no foundation on which to stand. And that's often why we feel so unstable. That's why we feel like we're being swept off our feet. You see, he must be our life, our center, the core of who we are facing this suffering as he intended. Because, we're reminded of Jesus' words himself. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Or as he said in John 10:10, I have come that you might have life, my life, and that you might experience the abundance of my life. Or as Jesus said in John chapter 16 and verse 33, he said, he made us a promise. In this world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. So again, we can't just ask God to eliminate something that He's kind of told us we're going to face, and then invited us to participate with Him as we walk through it, because we won't experience all that He intends for our lives if that's the way He handled it.
Don, I agree. I think, again, it's a hard thing for us to hear sometimes, but the reality and the truth is that pain is oftentimes God's opportunity to get through to us. And in regards, in relation to pain, I often think about Jesus in the garden, right? Mm-hmm. And He's praying to His Father, please, if you can, take this cup away. And what's God's answer? It's no. Mm-hmm. It's no. And obviously all of us are very thankful that the answer was no. Exactly. Yeah.
So whenever there's pain, people want to know, well, what about healing? And my response to that was, of course, God is the great physician and He is the healer. And yet God's primary purpose, once again, when it comes to healing, and this is something I think we've lost sight of, or we never really discovered, that when it comes to healing, He wants to heal that which hinders us from experiencing Him relationally in intimacy. Now again, we just want the pain to be gone, but He wants to often heal us from that which is hindering us relationally. He wants to heal the wounds that are inside of us, in our soul. Wounds that often hinder us from experiencing His best in our life. Something has often come between us and Him, and He wants to heal that which is separating us from Him. Again, whatever we're suffering, the pain that we're suffering, that doesn't mean that God placed that there. That doesn't mean it was of God. It could have been of the devil. But our response, or the way that we're dealing with it, that may be hindering us from experiencing God's relationship as He's endeavoring to help us to walk through that. And so the reality is He uses everything. Even those things we would not consider to be for our good, even that which is evil. Now again, let me clarify so somebody doesn't misunderstand. He is not the author of evil, nor does He cause evil. But nevertheless, He will use all things for His glory. We often struggle with this problem of pain in this world because there are no easy answers that will take away our pain. I mean, there's a whole industry with pain medication, to kind of deaden the pain that people are experiencing. And again, there's an appropriate place for that. But God is bigger than what we are struggling with. Do we really believe that? You see, when we're struggling, that's when we're challenged. That's when, our beliefs are tested. Do we really believe that God is bigger? He wants us to relationally trust Him even in this, not simply by fixing it or by simply taking it away, but allowing us the time to discover His loving goodness, even in our darkest, most painful moments of life. You see, God's remedy for our pain is not often in answers to our questions or solutions to our problems. It's much better. It's an invitation for us to experience a deep relationship of trust with Him. Listen to the prophet Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 17, we read this: "Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. For he will be like a tree planted by the water, that extends its roots by a stream. For and will not fear when the heat comes. And its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit. So it might be said that pain gives you what happiness never could. Pain reveals God's availability and sufficiency.
I think that's a really amazing insight because, and you wonder and you ask back in the garden, right? Why did God put the curses, right, on us? Really, it was gracious. And it was God's love to show that we can't live apart from Him as an independent being, which was the lie, right? We talked about that in previous videos as well. So, Dom, would you have a biblical example of God's availability and sufficiency during times of great loss and pain?
Yeah, there's more than one, I'm sure. The one that comes to mind for me is in the Gospel, when the Gospel of John, when Lazarus falls ill and then dies. And of course, they had sent a message to Jesus to quick come because his good friend Lazarus was sick and death was imminent. And Jesus did not immediately come. In fact, I think that was one of the reasons that Martha in particular, Mary and Martha, but Martha in particular, I think was kind of incensed by it. Like, where have you been? Like we told you, you had plenty of time to get here and you didn't get here. So here we see a situation where Jesus allows Lazarus to suffer and to die from the sickness. And then we see that Lazarus' family, as I said, including Mary and Martha, are heartbroken and I think maybe a little bit bitter over their loss. And so why does Jesus allow this and seemingly orchestrate it, orchestrating all this suffering and even death? Well, interestingly enough, he tells us. It's right in the context. He says, it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. You say, well, man, no wonder I don't think the way God thinks. God's ways are not my ways. You see, God allows suffering to bring Himself glory. We don't have to like that. I'm not suggesting that you say, oh, goody, I get to suffer today. Unless you begin to understand that you're entering into the sufferings of Christ. And so we certainly haven't answered all the questions relating to the topic of pain and suffering in this short broadcast. But if you were listening carefully, it's not a cure, but rather there's a purpose. And the purpose is to shed light on the subject. To shed light on the fact that there is brevity of life. And this brevity of life is often heightened through pain and suffering that we face, which then potentially reveals the eternality of Christ as our life. Think about it. When you've been most desperate in your life, yes, there are those that have become embittered and turned away, but then many of us rather have turned to God and cried out to God. As Paul states in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in verse 17 and 18, he says, this slight, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, because we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, they're temporal, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Meditate on that verse. This verse pinpoints God's purpose and our part, if you want to call it that, in this most important decision of how to face pain and suffering. Peter writes, he says, dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come upon you to test you, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed by his glory revealed through you. And so there you have it. May our prayer be, as Paul wrote to the Philippian church, I want you to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow obtaining to the resurrection from the dead. Don't allow the sufferings and pain of life to distract you from the relationship that you have with Jesus. We hope that you were encouraged and blessed by this video. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback and interact. If you have a testimony that relates to today's discussion, please share it below in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of our broadcasts. Be sure to check out our blog on our website, which is in the description below. And if you'd like to support our work financially, we have also provided the link. And until next time, may you experience life as God intended.